Thanks, Lawrence. Hello, everyone. So as you just got the notice, this webinar will be recorded so we can share it later on with all of you and with others who weren't able to join us today. Super excited for this third session of our four-part series on monitoring. So I'm Bree Owens. I'm from Western Landowners Alliance, and I'm coming to you from Northern California, where I also raise cattle. Western Landowners Alliance is a landowner founded and led organization that advances policies and practices that sustain working lands, connected landscapes, and native species. We do this through a vast West-wide network focused on collaborative place-based conservation, which we're excited today to be able to highlight some examples of that type of work in relation to monitoring and stewardship. We primarily work through three avenues to accomplish our mission. One is through peer-to-peer learning opportunities such as today. The other is elevating landowner and rural community voices in the policy space and in other conversations where they need to be heard. And then finally, by telling the story of stewardship in the West broadly, trying to break down some of that rural-urban divide, but just bring us all together in a meaningful way. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks to our partner, Kavira Coalition on this, and to our speakers today. Really excited. Turn it back over to you, Lawrence.
Thanks, Bree. I'm just going to let you know exactly how we're going to conduct today's webinar. First of all, we have four speakers with us today. Kris, Hulvey, David Gilroy, Kent Ellett, and Chaz Perry. They're all experts in what they do. And what we're going to do is actually go ahead and have all four presentations, and then we'll have them answer questions at the end after all the presentations have been done. So if you have any questions, we would ask you to put them in the chat, and Bree is going to be monitoring the chat, and so we'll go ahead and do it that way, just for time purposes. And so our first speaker today is actually going to be Dr. Kris Hulvey. She is an ecologist and lead scientist at the Working Lands Conservation. Under her leadership, Working Lands Conservation research that tests innovative conservation strategies for working landscapes that require collaborative action among stakeholders. Dr. Hulvey has over 20 years of research experience focused on ecosystem restoration and the links between ecosystem management, ecosystem functioning, and human well-being. Her past research includes restoration of ecosystem services in Australian woodlands, management of yellow star thistle in California grasslands, and the effective and management of non-native species in islands in California and Alaska. She now works in Utah rangelands with an interdisciplinary team to determine how to innovate grazing systems on public lands and can improve riparian conditions while also supporting rancher livelihoods. I'll turn it over now to Kris, Dr. Kris Hulvey. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. And let me share my screen here. Let's see, get this going. Thank you. Can everybody see that? I'm assuming yes.
Yes.
Great, thanks. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. Lawrence, that was a great introduction. So yes, I'm the lead scientist at a small nonprofit called Working Lands Conservation in Northern Utah. And I'm excited today to talk about two of my favorite subjects, so monitoring and the Three Creeks Grazing Project. I'm the one speaking about the Three Creeks Grazing Project today, but I want to note, I'm having trouble, let's see, forwarding my slide. Oh, there we go. I want to note that the project has a lot of different partners, people that own the land, people that run cattle on the land, a bunch of different research groups. And the project itself is located in northern Utah. in Rich County. It's about 140,000 acres in size. And the landmass that it crosses is a mix of private and public lands. So on this little cutout map, the green is Forest Service, the brown is BLM, and the white is state and private land. So it's a complex landscape. And this is mostly a public landscape. So when we think about managing on this landscape, we're really balancing a lot of different wants and needs. So the area has been used historically for cattle production, but there's also a lot of interest in balancing that cattle production with riparian health and habitat for important species like the greater sage grouse. I want to show you some pictures of the Three Creeks area. It isn't the typical red rock desert you might think of when you think of Utah. We are high in the mountains, so there's a lot of sagebrush. There's also a number of small perennial streams that crisscross our entire area. And we do a lot of monitoring in these stream areas. They are hotspots for ecosystem service generation. They're also important places that are used by cattle. So there's a lot going on in those areas. Now, kind of the crux of the whole Three Creeks project is that they are switching management across this big landscape from historical management to a new system. And I want to explain a little bit about that switch and the monitoring we're doing in that transition. So the historical management has been that this landscape is divided into 10 different allotments, and there are 38 permittees that graze across that system. Some of the guys graze in run and common, and some are grazing on single allotments. Most of the grazing systems are longer duration systems, so running season long, which in our area is 4 months, or a 2-month slow rotation. There can be some problems when you think about grazing in single allotments. So when you just have a single allotment to move your cattle around in, it really reduces the flexibility you have to think about different management options. So some outcomes might be poor grazing distribution of your herd, or another thing that can happen is that it's hard to incorporate rest into that landscape. And we're seeing repercussions of that in our systems at Three Creeks. So across our systems, we have some riparian areas that are in pretty poor condition. Habitat in those areas can be kind of questionable for sage grouse and trout. The water quality standards in some of these areas aren't being met, and those are state water quality standards. And because of these things, there have been some lawsuits that have threatened the grazing operations on this area. And so what are some solutions to that? And so the whole process of coming up with a solution is another great story. And I'm just going to give you kind of the cliff notes because I really want to talk about the monitoring. But what has happened was that the managers and permittees kind of decided to change the whole grazing system in this area. So the permittees formed a local resource management group. They visioned a new grazing system. They formed an LLC. So the 38 permittees formed a company that makes management decisions across this area. Together, they went through a NEPA process that took 8 years and was approved in 2018, and it's going to be implemented in 2022, this new grazing system. And the system that they're implementing is taking that 10 allotment landscape and consolidating it into a single allotment. They're combining all of their herds into 2 herds that are going to rotate across the landscape. And because of that system, they're going to be able to shorten duration in a lot of the pastures and rest about 20% of the landscape every year. They came up with the system, it took a while. They had a neighbor nearby, a private ranch called Deseret Land and Livestock, that had switched their own grazing practices about 30 years previous. There was a lot of communication with the managers on Deseret and the managers at Three Creeks to help develop this plan. So that was really helpful in this process. Now, the monitoring challenge across this landscape is to demonstrate good land stewardship with this switch in rest rotational grazing across a really large landscape that has multiple landowners, permittees, and partners involved. And part of the reason this is challenging is because a lot of these stakeholders just have different monitoring goals. So for example, the agencies that own the land, the BLM and the Forest Service, they are really interested in improving habitat for wildlife, improving riparian area conditions, and also meeting Utah state water quality benchmarks. The ranchers, the 38 permittees that run cattle across the area, are interested in making sure that this new system is still supporting their operations. So they want to know what the economic outcomes are going to be. They also want to make sure that any monitoring done prepares them for the potential of any future lawsuits. So they want access to data. And they also want the monitoring to be done in a way that informs adaptive management, so future grazing decisions. The team that's coming together to do this monitoring is really varied. The goals are pretty varied too. So we're focusing on a lot of different ecological aspects as we're doing the monitoring across this really large landscape. So we're looking at forage production, sage grouse habitat quality, stream stability, plant diversity, water quality and quantity, soil health and soil carbon storage. And then we also have some more community-based metrics that we want to make sure we're paying attention to. So things like, how is the implementation of this new grazing system affecting economic stability? Are the people participating satisfied with the new grazing system? And is the data being shared amongst all of the partners? There is a real power to monitoring with such a diverse group of people, including state agencies, federal agencies, university partners, and nonprofits. So having that many people on the ground allows us to measure in more areas more often with multiple methods that allow us to triangulate on certain questions that we want answered. And hopefully we can do this with less cost to individual groups, but that only works if we share our data and have a lot of coordination. So there are some complexities that we've been navigating. So with this many different partners, it's really important for the partners to start understanding each other's needs. What do people need from the monitoring? And then once we start talking the same talk and really understanding those needs, we can crosswalk our goals for monitoring, make sure that we are hitting all of these important things that people need from this, to learn from this landscape. And then of course we need to break down barriers to data sharing. And there's a lot of reasons that there can be barriers, whether it's for publishing in academic journals or the need for an organization just to hold their data secure, or the possibility of lawsuits. So all of this requires building trust, and it takes a lot of time. Luckily, we've had a lot of time because it took about 8 years to go through that NEPA. Through the process, we've learned that there's a couple of factors that have been really key to the success of the project, but also of our ongoing monitoring program. And so I want to run through those because I think they apply to our project, but they would apply to many large-scale monitoring projects. The first thing is that there's been a local champion through this whole process, a gentleman named Taylor Payne. He works for the Utah Department of Ag and Food in a subgroup called the Grazing Improvement Program. Taylor grew up on a ranch. He's worked for government agencies, so he can kind of crosswalk the speak and ideas. He also lives in the community where this project is happening. So he's built a ton of trust in the community. He is a pivotal person for making introductions and making sure everybody is connecting with the right people. There's also been a really steady source of funding for this project and for monitoring. So the state agency, the Department of Ag and Food, has continually provided pools of money to keep this project and the monitoring going forward. We have a really innovative BLM office. We have some managers and leaders there that have been in the office for a while and that are really vested in this project, not afraid to kind of take that professional leap of faith. We have established communication channels. So Utah State University as an extension group that has been working in this community for years and years, and they have provided a facilitated forum for all of these different folks to come together and share data and ideas about what's happening out in this project area. Then we have groups like ours at Working Lands that kind of can fill some niches. So we can work with the BLM and other folks that are doing monitoring and figure out what data isn't being collected. Where are the gaps? And because we aren't bound by, let's say, very precise protocols. Let's say the BLM uses AIM and they have to use that protocol. We can create protocols that answer very specific questions in particular places. So we can fill in some of that knowledge gap. And then finally, there's a will in this group to add new partners as needed. So as new questions in monitoring come up, they're not afraid to reach out and find the group that can help answer those questions. So all of this only works if all of the information is shared, and we've found that some of the best ways to keep this group connected and share our data is through a lot of field tours. I'd say our group alone does maybe 8 a summer, but there's probably at least 20 that go on every year. Personal meetings to visit, but also to share findings informally. And then finally, again, that facilitated forum created by Utah State. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about the kinds of monitoring we're doing and how we've approached the monitoring in this kind of dispersed collaborative group. So for our vegetation monitoring, I call this kind of the divide and conquer strategy. We have some groups that are really interested in forage production, like the rancher-led Three Creeks Grazing LLC. They've hired a consultant to do some of that monitoring. We have some groups like Utah State University that is really interested in sage grouse, so they're focused on sage grouse habitat. And then we have groups like BLM and Working Lands, our group, that we monitor a whole bunch of things. We are separated a little bit by BLM having these strict protocols and can only monitor in limited locations. We monitor a lot of metrics. We have flexible protocols and we can monitor in strategic locations. So together we get this vegetation monitoring done. Water quality monitoring has kind of taken a different tact. So we've really combined resources for this one. So up until 2017, the BLM was completing a lot of the water quality monitoring. UGEP, the state agency, applied for some grants and started to have some monitoring obligations. Our group started working with the BLM and co-monitored for a number of years before completely taking over that monitoring. And now we give the data that we collect to both BLM and GIP, fulfilling those monitoring obligations. And then the last one I'll tell you about is soil health and carbon. And this is an area that really developed from the relationships that have been built amongst all the partners and just recently developed. There was a real interest in the permittees to enter the carbon markets. So UGEP and Taylor Payne stepped in as the local champion and connected those ideas with us. We reached out to the NRCS to bring in some soil specialists and hired a soil ecologist to take on that project. So kind of this evolution and of monitoring strategies. The final metrics, of course, are the community metrics. We really want to know if this integrative grazing system is working for producers. There are risks and benefits to producers. So we are conducting surveys, doing interviews, and conducting an economic analysis just to make sure this project is getting it right. So just to end, this thought of, are we meeting our monitoring goals? And we think we are. We've developed this great network of stakeholder communication. We have a lot of monitoring going on and results being shared. And all of that is combining together to keep an eye on the grazing and do adaptive management when needed. So that's my short presentation about Three Creeks, and I'm really excited for the conversations that are going to happen a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, Kris. Just for to make sure we're moving on quickly enough, we're going to go right to the next one. And the next presentation is going to be done by David Gilroy. David has been working with the Taos Soil and Water Conservation District since 2019, where he works as a conservation educator visiting regional elementary and middle schools. He seasonally coordinates student forest monitoring teams to connect Taos County high school and college students with ecological changes resulting from watershed restoration projects. With formal schooling from Taos High School, UNM, and the University of Wisconsin, he enjoys work that connects scientific research, public education, and community resilience. Prior to his time at Taos Soil and Water Conservation District, David's professional experience has centered around ecological field research, youth career development in conservation work, and classroom science teaching. Outside of the workplace, he and his family enjoy regular lessons from nature as they explore interesting places, farming, and trying to live closer to the land and each passing day. And now I'll turn it over to David Gilroy.
Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you everybody for making this happen and inviting Taos Soil and Water to share a story that we're excited to be part of, and that's monitoring and engaging the community in looking at our natural resources and changes that are being made. Right. Lawrence, if you could let me know when my screen is visible. All right. So I'm coming to you today from Taos Soil and Water Conservation District to share a story that is tying our community's youth into the monitoring picture from northern New Mexico. And I'm calling in from my hometown in Taos area, which has been home to the Tiwa people of Taos Pueblo since time immemorial, home to Spanish settlers since the 1600s, with the first visitors coming a little earlier in the late 1500s, and home to many other European settlers, most of us like myself, English speaking, that started in the 1800s. For some historical reference, New Mexico became a US territory in 1850 and a state pretty late in the game in 1912. Our forests are not resilient in the face of climate change, is what we're learning from a lot of good science. Models looking at the future and what we're dealing with, but some history of land use that was very different than the traditional fire regime. So starting in the early 1900s, fire suppression throughout the West, including our region in the Southern Rockies, became prevalent. Heavy grazing that overlapped during some drought periods, especially 1930s, 1940s, ending for a short period in the 60s. And now we feel like we're in drought again, caused some changes to the ecosystem and changes in the forest stand and understory vegetation. And today we're left with what we're finding to be dense, unhealthy forest stands with a lot of young trees. And this is interesting in the eyes of people like, let's say, my parents who moved to the area in the 1970s. If we're not out there doing the dendrochronology, we might not have a vision for what the forest always looked like or what it was when there was a natural fire regime. So there's somewhat of a information gap when it comes to forest ecology and forest history in our area, depending upon the reference points that we have. There's a lot of rationale for forest treatment in our area. The picture on the left here is the Hondo fire, and it started in the community of San Cristobal, actually my home community. I was a senior in high school at the time, and I think it burned 8,000 acres in such a rapid rate. It was one of the fastest growing fires at its time. So looking to prevent that catastrophic level stand replacement fire with a prescribed fire that mimics a more natural fire regime, especially in our lowland pinon juniper woodlands where fire regime was between 10 and 30 years. And in cases where prescribed burning is not an option, or before prescribed burning, mimicking the thinning effects of low intensity fire with chainsaw work or mastication work and forest resiliency. I was recommended by a firefighter once not to use the word restoration because he said, what are we restoring to? But as we make a forest more resilient, especially in the face of climate change, the these power tools and the communities around our forests that can benefit from forest products are key in making our forests more resilient. So to begin our monitoring story with students, it began thanks to the U.S. Forest Service and their Collaborative Forest Restoration Program, known as CFRP. The project that was funded back in 2018, 2019 is called the Forest Mayordomo Project. And north of Taos, between the communities of San Cristobal, Valdez, and Arroyo Hondo, 300 acres were of Carson National Forest federal land was opened up for forest thinning by local community members using a stewardship model that was also developed in another part of Taos County near Peñasco. And taking that good idea and taking the stewardship that goes back hundreds of years with the Spanish settlers and how they moved water through agricultural lands with our acequia systems, there is a concept of mayordomo, and that is a ditch boss and someone in a community that would allocate water at different times to different locations throughout a valley. So using that idea, the step forward in the Forest Mayordomo project was to take community engagement that we saw from another part of our county, where neighbors in these communities were given 1 acre of federal land to access and thin out small diameter timber. But this time, instead of the Forest Service having to manage all the people coming out with their truck access, what acres they get and how they go about thinning it, is community members came together and said, we can do that management on the local level using the model of the acequias and the mayordomo or ditch boss. So we now have forest boss, known as the Forest Mayordomo. And here on the right, a group of my students are working with Art Montoya, the first Forest Mayordomo in a restoration project. The grant, the CFRP grants have many goals. Large ones obviously being wildfire threat reduction, creating a healthier, more stable and resilient ecosystem. And the part that we play at Taos Soil and Water is related to forest-related employment through youth employment, stakeholder diversity by getting more community members involved, and multi-party monitoring, a major focus of the Collaborative Forest Restoration Program. This grant was written by a gentleman named J.R. Logan, a journalist, formerly for the Taos News, that fell in love with the folks that were trying to reconnect with federal lands that were once their communal lands under Spanish land grants. And Mr. Logan, in meeting many community members, said we can access these formerly communal lands and help the Forest Service out with a forest that is in need of much work. They formed the Cerro Negro Forest Council. They were awarded a CFRP grant for 4 years for about $360,000. And they were willing to cut a portion of those funds to support a local high school and students in coming out to lead the monitoring and get community members involved in seeing the before after changes. And that's where I came in as a teacher at Taos High School at the time. With help from New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute, connected to New Mexico Highlands University, they provided protocols for myself and students to follow in documenting the changes. So what does our forest monitoring look like? Students are exposed to what random plot selection looks like and the importance of random, especially if a site like this is filled with cactus and dense trees, and they know it's going to be a lot of work, that we have to remove the bias. Our plots were located approximately every 10 acres out of our forest project areas, and they were based on a common stand exam circle plot of 1/10 acres in size. So for example, in our first project, this Forest Mayordomo CFRP, for 300 acres, we had 30 monitoring points. The protocols included a simplification of the common stand exam, where all trees in a radius from a plot center point are measured, species identified, and the measurements include diameter at breast height, diameter at root collar if needed, species identification, height, and evidence of disease. One of the most simplistic measurements that communities often enjoyed learning from our student groups were just the difference in trees per acre. In some places we had densities of over 1,200 trees per acre, with the majority of those trees being relatively young within the last 50 years. So again, tying to that period of heavy drought with heavy grazing and strong fire suppression. Afterwards, the trees in our first monitoring project were dropping by more than 50%, from over 600 on average to 200 trees per acre. And in this case, those are the larger diameter trees that were selected when the local woodcutters came out and did their thing. The students got a crash course in plant identification. And as we got local university and community college students involved, they really enjoyed getting out their identification books. And in addition to learning the trees, which was pretty easy, looking at the shrubs, understory cover, getting in the forbs and grasses. Pre-post measurement is where, as a crew and as monitoring teams, the students often were most excited to see the changes and see how here preferential treatment kept certain trees like Douglas fir and their diameter remained large, and whereas trees that were preferentially removed, like white fir, that were seen as encroaching and causing increased fire danger in our local forests, had a much larger diameter after thinning, with the smaller diameter trees removed. As we partnered with the Forest Service and New Mexico State Forestry on another project, surface fuels was a major interest. One aspect of forest thinning is that there can be a lot of fuel left afterwards. So how is fuel removed? Are there chippers? Is the fuel removed for fuel wood? What's the decomposition rate depending on the location? And our crews being able to monitor that provided helpful management input. And not necessarily required, but a fun component that we try to incorporate to have a good historical understanding of the forest before and after the thinning was to do some cores of trees, of live trees, and look at the dendrochronology. Where trees were thinned, we could use the stumps and sand them down, and the students could get a good idea of the age of the removed trees. And finally, before after photos were a key part of monitoring and will continue to be into the future as we see the changes in the forest canopy as well as understory cover. The dendrochronology has been an interesting part of the student monitoring that has prompted some students to be interested in going on in further careers when they saw such a simple tool can be used to understand hundreds of years of forest history. So what are some of the successes of this relatively new approach to monitoring in our area by incorporating students? Community outreach has been a major part. Although we as an educator and the students are not technically forestry experts, our little time in the forest and with the training and the protocols provided to us, we were able to break down a little bit of the before after picture for community members that are invested in the forest health for reasons of water, wildfire protection, or heritage. And in this case, the students in this picture presenting to the board members that manage a historical land grant, the El Salto land grant. The before-after photos are very effective, and when used in conjunction with some historical photos, which are hard to come by, it helps a lot of community members see the difference based on the thinning, but also in relative to what the forest used to look like in prior years. So the visuals definitely are showing change and change for greater resiliency. That aligns with some of the scientific data we're getting from around the West and university studies indicating the benefits to water resources and our watersheds. But the quantifying of that change is helpful as well, as we don't want to be a monitoring team with students that's simply for exposure of young people to this sort of work and the need for this sort of science, but we wanted to provide quantifiable evidence of change that can be used to guide managers and forest experts. In this case, a success is where students can share that post-treatment, the larger diameter trees, in this case, white fir, still remained, trees that reach up to 150 years old. While on the left side in the graph, we see a high percentage, high number of trees of smaller diameter that were under 30 years old that are then removed post-treatment in the green bars on the right side. When we look at fuels, it's obvious after thinning. In this case, on the Forest Mayordomo project, that total surface fuels would increase with a lot of the slash. And so as controlled burns, one which was happening just this week, go through to clean out some of those remaining fuels. And as natural decomposition and breakdown happens, it'll be valuable to continue that multi-year monitoring to see those changes over time to the fuels on the ground. A success that I have been amazed by is that we've had leaders arise from our few years of student monitoring. Peggy DeScoville on the left here has gone on to lead another crew in data analysis, where they compile all our monitoring information and process it in a way that matches the learning she's having in her forestry program at Highlands University. Nick Lujan on the right here went on to lead another youth crew and share his love and connection to nature and his ideas for good forest management. So it's spreading after they've participated as a forest monitor. Relationships, I would say, is one of the greatest successes coming out of the student monitoring, and that's connecting our communities to each other. We have students from all over the county, from different high schools, from our local community colleges, and everything from sharing a birthday key lime pie on a tree cookie in the rain to slugging out the data on a hot summer day and getting that fuels information with friends from different high schools. Connecting students to agency leaders here with the Quested Ranger, Jack Lewis, and some of his staff. When they came out and met our students, as well as other teachers, we are connecting the students to professionals that they can see opportunities if they enjoy this sort of work, but also is connecting students that may come from families that don't have the best opinion of our federal land agencies due to the history in northern New Mexico, and reuniting the students with the managers of the land, as well as with the local communities that are playing a role in having some access to this forest, has been very positive. Looking ahead, we are looking at alumni surveys, seeing what the students do after monitoring, interviewing the thinning contractors known as niñeros, the woodcutters, aligning our protocols with U.S. Forest Service, silvicultural surveys, and digital data collection. There are many people to acknowledge, including the over 35 students that have been with us. And so I'm just going to finish by scrolling through the slides. all our monitors in the past, and I look forward to our summer together where we'll get out and monitor again.
Thanks, David. We're going to go ahead and move right along. The Kent Ellett and Chaz Perry are going to be presenting jointly, and so I'll go introduce them. And before I do, I'm just going to let you know that the last couple of webinars that we've had, we have run over a little bit longer than and we've actually gone through the question and answer periods, and so we're going to go over again today. So anybody that if you have time would be welcome to stick with us even after 12:30. First, I'd like to introduce Kent. Kent is the United States Forest Service Range Management Specialist for the Southwest region, which includes Arizona, New Mexico, and the grasslands of Oklahoma and Texas. Kent began his career in 1985 as a seasonal range aide in Utah. In 1992, he earned his bachelor's degree in range science from Utah State University. For the past 30 years, he has worked in range management as a line officer for the Forest Service and the BLM in Idaho, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, and in some work in New Mexico. Chaz Perry is a data scientist with the University of Arizona School of Natural Resources and Environment. He is focused on rangeland, forestry, and geospatial solutions. He joined the VGS development team in 2015 to further spatial capabilities, manage increased user demand, and to provide technical support and training. Now I will turn it over to Kent and Chaz.
Thanks, Lawrence. And David, it's good to hear all the work you're doing with the youth. I've spent a lot of my career working with youth groups, and it's good to see you're involving them with management and your monitoring. I'm going to talk a little bit about, the theme is effective land stewardship through monitoring and connecting the dots, and some of the tools that we're doing here in the Southwest to do that. Our region covers Arizona and New Mexico, as well as the grasslands in Oklahoma and part of Texas. And a couple weeks ago, we gave a little presentation about some platforms we're using to help us with our annual allotment inspection type monitoring. And today we're going to focus more on the monitoring that we conduct for our long-term kind of your condition and trend monitoring, and a platform we're using for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the what and why, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chaz and he can explain the how we go about doing it. And I'm going to start with good, better, and best. It's good to have some type of monitoring to see if your management is effective and if things are responding the way you'd like it to. And if that monitoring is nothing more than a photo record, then good for you. Photos paint 1,000 words, picture paints 1,000 words, and it's good to have at least photos. Better would be to have some data, some recordings of what you observe, and like if you run a transect to go along with those photos. And in the past, we have used paper and pencil and taken photographs, and that's a little better, but it also has its challenges. It takes a long time to sort and summarize that data and to store it. And then when you store it, you often put it in a file cabinet and you wonder if it'll ever see the light of day again. And then when you need to use that data, it can be a challenge to pull it back up and to look at it and to make it usable. But that's still better. The even better is if we have a platform that allows us to do a better job to make it easier to collect the data, collect it together, have a place to store, and then to query and retrieve that information so that we can make good management decisions on what we're doing. And that's where the VGS platform comes into play. We've had a great working relationship with the University of Arizona since 2007, 2008. So quite a while. It's been a long process. We're in version 5 at this point. And we're developing quite a powerful tool to help us to collect and retrieve and query our data. So I'm going to turn it over now to Chaz Perry with the University of Arizona to kind of walk us through this particular platform that we're using. And it's not just now in the Southwest, but it's becoming used throughout the Forest Service, through all the various regions. As it's not the cure-all, it's not the latest and greatest of anything, but it is, as you'll see, a very effective and powerful tool to help us with our long-term data gathering and sharing. So Chaz, I'll turn it over to you and let you take it.
Excellent. Thanks, Ken. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. So VGS is a free application suite for recording, managing, summarizing, and reporting on quantitative and qualitative data. It was started as a grassroots application to kind of consolidate photos, paper data sheets, and to create an easier way to manage it and to report on it. And so over the years, through agreements with the Park Service, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Forest Service, and the NRCS, we've continued to improve VGS to handle quantitative and qualitative data forms. So this is a myriad of the data types that VGS can handle: cover, density, frequency, and weight, utilization, residue, structure, and as well as qualitative. Surveys is the newest introduction in VGS 5. Similar to Survey 123, we can handle custom surveys, and users can create custom protocols. And so these protocols are great because they standardize the data that's being collected in the field. VGS 5 introduced two-way syncing to the data collection system. And so now data that's collected typically and historically was on a Windows device can now be synced to an online repository and housed under one database and reported on from the web as well. We are currently developing an Android and iOS version, but currently VGS 5 and VGS Online are in production and running. So go ahead and escape that, and I'll just jump right in and show you the desktop application and its features. So the desktop application uses a folder structure hierarchy similar to Windows File Explorer, to where users can store data under folders. And in this particular example, the 7K allotment is on the Tonto National Forest. Within the allotment, there's 4 pastures. Under each of these pastures, there may be 1 or 2 sites. And then there's also a local folder. The blue folders are syncable folders, so anything that's collected under these blue folders can be synced to the remote server. The local folder just stays on the device. So VGS stores the site data and the sampling data in a site, and we can go ahead and look at an existing site, and we'll see that you're given the ability to collect notes, to collect spatial references, to determine what kind of site type it is. There's description surveys. There's portfolios where you can add transect photos or documents. And then there's the log, which houses the monitoring information. And so with VGS, the log is really the meat and potatoes of the application. So this is where, if you're doing repeat visits to a site, you can organize those visits, and we'll go ahead and look at one of those. So we'll pick on this site here. This is the field form, and this is where VGS really shines. It allows for easy data capture, one sample at a time. So here, this particular site has 4 transects with 50 samples per transect. And as we're going through and collecting this data, you can move 1 sample at a time. Here's 4 of those methods that we saw on the list. There's point, ground cover, fetch, frequency, and dry weight rank. One of the benefits to VGS is that it displays, it does reference the NRCS plants database, and it can display the plants either with the NRCS code, the common name of the plant, or the Latin species name. Okay, and as you're entering data, it's saving this species list. So if we wanted to visit this site again, we could pull up all of the species that had occurred previously, and we'll already have that list of species ready for us to use to collect next year's data or this year's data. Reporting is also integrated into VGS. So here we can actually run a report while we're in the field. As soon as we've collected this data, we can run a form report or a method report and see exactly what's happening out there. So if we've just run these transects, there's certain options that you can have for those reports, but we'll just do the basic one here. So here you can see, here's our ground cover results, our fetch, and our frequency by species with the corresponding dry weight rank. These reports can be printed, saved as a PDF, emailed. For long-term trend monitoring, VGS really shines because you can actually compare your results right in the field as well. So if you're working, if you're collecting data on a site like this one that has 3 years of standard data collection, we can go ahead and compare, if we want to compare the frequency of the plants, you can add some statistics to this report. We'll just run the basic one here. And it's going to compare by species over those 3 events. So you can see how the species frequency has changed over time. So here we can see Bromus rubens is declining, and maybe we've got an indicator species somewhere in here. We could determine whether or not it's increasing or decreasing. So VGS5 added the ability to collect survey data as well. So we'll take a brief look at the NRCS Interpreting Indicators of Range Health version 5. And we can see that it's easy to come through here and run through that particular protocol and answer these questions. All of these protocols and surveys are customizable for the user depending on what kind of data they want to collect. Survey questions can have tips to help you answer that question. They can also have comments. If for some reason there was moderate to extreme rilling, you could leave a comment and give a justification. The surveys also have reports tied to them as well. Let's see. So that's when I mentioned that the VGS references the NRCS plants database, it can search that entire list of species. So if we wanted to look up Pinus ponderosa, we can look it up by code, common name, or Latin name. And we can even tie the species list to images, if you have images, to further identify plant species. Okay, we're running out of time here, so I'm going to switch over to the VGS Online. So once data has been collected in VGS 5 or VGS for Android, it can be synced to the server, and we'll just run through real quick and show you the features of VGS Online. So we can go pick on that same allotment. We could either navigate to it via the folder structure, or we can search for it. So we're looking for that 7K allotment. And here's that allotment with those 4 pastures. We can then, all of the reports that you can run in VGS 5, you can also run in VGS Online. So we'll go to that buckskin pasture. We can either look at the view the site info. It provides a location on a mini map, From there, we can look at the image, any images that are tied to that particular site. Or we can look at the reporting dashboard to see what report options are available. Again, we can report on an individual method on the entirety of the form, or we can run those same comparison reports. There's actually more reports available on VGS Online than there is in VGS 5. So having the ability to sync to the server makes it nice if you're using multiple devices to collect data. It puts it all into one place. But VGS Online also gives the user the ability to further query their data. So if we wanted to maybe get an idea as to where there might be some erosion on a forest, in this example, we can pick on the Coronado National Forest. We'll select that forest. We'll see that there is 761 sites on that forest currently. We can query by terrain, elevation, and aspect if that data was collected, by the protocols used, and the methods used in those protocols. We can look for individual species like invasive species or rare and threatened species. Or we can search by the results of some of the methods that were used. So if we wanted to know where there was high chance of erosion, we might want to look at ground cover by category with bare soil and say, okay, where out of these 761 sites is bare soil greater than 50%? Okay, and we'll set that. But actually, that's the Coronado has data going back many, many years, so we probably only want to use the most recent survey to see what's actively is actively or currently has a threat to erosion. Oh, something's happened. Okay, try that one more time. Statistics, category, bare soil, greater than 50. Use the most recent survey. Okay, apparently there are none. So VGS Online, aside from being able to query the data more, allows users to either sync to the server, or for folks that are looking at information on more of a landscape scale, they can run reports across multiple forests, not only from the folder structure view, but also from map view. So if we wanted to pick on the Tonto some more, we can actually look at all of the sites on the Tonto National Forest via a map, and we can further run all of those reports based upon the selection, whether it be a custom area of interest, or by layers that are uploaded to VGS Online, such as district boundaries, allotment boundaries, TEUIs, or soils. And one of the biggest examples on the Tonto currently is for features, at least for this mapping function, is for the recent fires. So there was the Woodbury fire and the Bush fire, and we can see those and how that we can select that by that polygon and select all of those sites to see how they were affected by that fire, or to see what, now that we have the fire boundary, what sites do we want to visit post fire to collect those that data for those changes. Okay, I guess that we're running out of time here, so I guess I can wrap that up as to a brief exposure to VGS 5 and VGS Online. And Ken, anything to add?
Okay. Thanks, Chaz and Ken. Well,
Hey, Lawrence, let me just say one thing. I think part of the power of this VGS is be able to query the data. It's not one thing to collect it. It's very quick to collect it with that platform, but to query. For an example, all back there on the Coronado, we were curious if a certain new invasive species was showing up. can you imagine going to all 5 districts, pulling all those file cabinets out, going through all those 761 folders to see if you had come across a certain invasive species. Instead of this query, we put in the species, hit apply, and oh, it's found in one place of all those places. Oh, it's good to know it's there though. Now we can go treat it. Or we had a request from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Do you have these types of vegetation on this aspect, on this elevation range? This is a big ask. I'm sure it's going to take months for you to dig through all your folders. Could you look at that for us? Yeah, give us about 15 minutes. We'll have that for you. So we queried it and was able to produce a map that showed that. So the query data on this platform is very strong. So even though we had no fines for 50%, that's probably just a high number. We don't manage for at least 50% ground cover. Had you put in a lower rate, it'd come up. But anyways, to be able to query the data is very powerful. Then you can share that and have some management discussion. So it's a good tool. We've really enjoyed our relationship with U of A in developing this and using it.
Thanks. We're going to go to questions right now, and so Bree's been monitoring the questions, so I'm going to turn it over to her. But right now, I was just going to ask a question to start it off. Is if VGS could be applied to like what they're doing on the Three Creeks project, or what they're doing on the work to customize to be done with David's students are doing on their, would it be able to be that customized for them?
Absolutely. And so VGS is funded through agreements mostly with federal partners, and that results in custom options. One of the biggest ones that we had recently was the sage grouse. So in 2015 and 2016, we developed a custom sage grouse protocol, and that was used on 13 national forests in 3 regions. So yeah, if VGS can't already handle the type of data that you're wanting to collect, it can be modified and developed to handle it.
Thanks. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bree now, because I'm sure there's probably some questions that you've come up with there. So I'll turn it over to you, Bree.
Okay, thanks. David, did you have something to add there?
I just want to say I took a lot of notes during Chaz's presentation of all the benefits if we move into a system like VGS. And I think students would love to be able to get immediate reports for their storytelling as well.
Yeah, that's certainly a great aspect of it. So one other question we had, and I see Kris responded to one in the chat there about sharing data with stakeholders. But another question that had come up earlier, and I want to pose this to all of you, is there concern about data sharing with the land managers, other stakeholders that you're working with, and if there are concerns, how do you address those? And Kris, we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. Oh, I also got a message on my phone at the same time. Yeah, so we have taken a lot of time to grow a lot of trust amongst our partners. Our organization has an MOU with the BLMs for data sharing. And for the most part, we're really free with sharing our data. One group that we don't ask data from is let's say the Three Creeks Ranchers. The Ranching LLC has a consultant come out to do range monitoring. They pay that consultant. I don't ask for those data. It's possible I could get them, but so there are some bits of data that aren't totally being shared around. I know that at times outside groups have emailed me and asked me for all of my water quality data. And at times like that, sometimes I'm a little cautious about sharing out data to groups that I don't know. You know, there's a lot of trust built amongst this group, and we kind of have a vision for how this data is being shared and used. All of our data eventually is published, which is great. So yeah, so it's complicated, but within our group, I think there's just this basis of trust that people work from and sharing the information that's needed for people to move forward with the monitoring and reaching, you know, their management goals on this landscape. And so if that didn't answer the question, please ask me again. So thanks.
Thank you. I'll go over to David with the data that you guys are collecting. Same question, please.
Yeah, Bree, we have no experience with people who have concerns over forestry data sharing yet. It's an interesting question you ask, because there are a lot of concerns in our community around water data, especially water quantity data. We haven't begun student monitoring of water, groundwater in particular, as teams, but we definitely know there are concerns there between the different jurisdictions, since water flows on the surface and underground. But fortunately, everybody in the forestry world is really excited to see what's happening with the restoration work, and they want to know what the story is on the ground beforehand as well. So it's been very open on that side of things.
Thank you. And then Kent, and Chaz, turning it over to you guys too with the same question. And I know it's a little bit different, but also thinking about for you guys with permittee engagement, other stakeholder engagement, how does the platform help support that? And then also, are there concerns around this, the way that the data is collected and handled and shared?
When we collect data, it's public information, and so anyone can access it and request it. The nice thing about VGS is while you're in the field, when you're done, you hit the button and all your data is summarized right there in the field. You can then also pull up past data that was recorded at that spot. And so as soon as you're done running a transect, you and the rancher, the permittee, can look at the results of that day's summary and compare it to past year's information right there in the field. And then, because our monitoring data is public information, we often get FOIA requests asking for, send us all your data for the last 15 or 20 years. And when we get those, we usually don't smile, because that means for the next week, we're sitting at the copy machine and going through the files and making copies for a whole week, to get the FOIA request out. So it's really nice to have things like this VGS, and 2 weeks ago we talked about Survey 123, where we can just query that data and boom, we're done very quickly. And then, Bree, I'm going to answer one question here that was asked as far as our NRM database. NRM and NRIS is the Forest Service National Database. Currently, VGS can't speak or isn't linked to those databases, but we are working with our Washington office to make that happen. Probably another year or two until we're there. We do have some programs for noxious weeds and our water rights. When we collect that data, it will speak to our national NRM database. And we are in the process of getting VGS and Survey 123 to where it will link up to our national database.
Great, thank you. Chaz, real quick, a question for you on other users of VGS, because I know this is used more broadly beyond the Forest Service. So can you speak to that, just other stakeholder use of it?
Yeah, absolutely. VGS is used by over 60 national forests, over 5 states with the NRCS. It's used by states and municipalities such as Pima County. Several NGOs use it, as well as private contractors. So there's definitely and tribal lands as well. So there's definitely a large user group. As far as the data is concerned, we don't share data with anybody. That's up to the data owners to make those decisions. So obviously with the NRCS, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they're very strict with who can see what. But as Ken mentioned, with Forest Service data, that could be FOIA'd. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. And then Kent, just a follow-up question for you that was posted here. Has the digital data, do you feel like it's resulted in more transparency, any cultural change, building of relationships? I know you spoke to like that, the permittee and the range con can look at it right there together right after it's collected. But what do you think that's done to relationships?
One thing we've also done in addition to working with U of A to develop the VGS platform is we now have monitoring agreements with the U of A for all 6 forests in Arizona. And we have some discussions now with Quivira and others in New Mexico to see if we can do something similar for the 5 national forests in New Mexico, as well as the grasslands. And as an example, on the Tonto, they wouldn't collect any data unless both the rancher and the Forest Service employees were present. On some other forests, we're good with say if the U of A employee collects the data, but at least then we're discussing and sharing that information. So yeah, I think it's improved our relationships greatly, and there is more transparency. I know from personal experience, sometimes, like if I was a permittee, I would want to have a copy of everything that goes in my file. And my dad's a permittee, and sometimes he's like, I have no idea what's in my Forest Service file. It's big, and there's a bunch of stuff in there. I don't know what's in there though. Well, that's not transparent, and that doesn't build relationships. And so the more transparent we can be and be open, we shouldn't be afraid of the data. We should welcome it and let's use it. And if you don't share it, you're not using it. So the more transparent you are, the better.
Thanks, Kent. I appreciate that. And so thinking about, I want to bring up a quick, many of you maybe saw, there was a recent article on High Country News about BLM and apparently some results of data showing that across the board, there's a lot of rangelands in poor condition. But I think what we're like hearing from you all today on Forest Service and Kris with your project that covers a lot of BLM ground, and a lot of other partners that are on today that are doing collaborative monitoring across these landscapes. If you could each speak to kind of, go a little deeper into this of what the collaborative monitoring offers in terms of these relationships, communication, and then what we actually do with the data and how the data can tell us the story of what's happening on the landscape, and then continue to, improve our stewardship of these lands. Because personally, I don't feel like that High Country News article did justice to what the good work that's actually happening out there. And so I want to give you each a chance to respond to that. Kris, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, being involved in Three Creeks, again, what I'm finding the most important in this project is the building of the relationships amongst all of these groups. By building those trust relationships, there's a lot more avenues to share the knowledge everybody is gaining about what's going on this landscape, and to tailor the monitoring to answer the real needs of management. So you can do a lot of monitoring, but if you're not targeting that monitoring to answer questions that people want to know and that have actionable responses, you're just collecting data, right? You share that data and you form a plan for what you really need to know, and then you can make real changes. And I feel like this collaborative monitoring, by pulling a bunch of people together that have different monitoring needs, forage production, water quality, sage grouse habitat, and everybody beginning to understand what everybody's needs are, it's really helped people come up with a bigger picture of how to tackle all of that. So yeah, so I feel like the data, definitely when you have the data and you're able to show people a picture, often is a great way to communicate, but graphs are a great way to communicate. Sometimes when you have the numbers to back up what people feel they're seeing, and those numbers are being produced by a common vision of what you're trying to accomplish on the landscape, it becomes really powerful. It creates new discussions, like I was mentioning in my presentation about what else do we want to monitor on this landscape? So the soil health and soil carbon was a big thing that came out of that trust that was built. So I do think that there's a lot of really great things happening in these collaborative monitoring schemes and groups on these landscapes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
David, similar for your group and how you guys chose to monitor what you are monitoring, because it does seem like you really fit that back to what the community themselves could participate in, and then also what was meaningful data back to the project and the community. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you guys selected your monitoring metrics?
Sure, Bree. Our metrics came largely from New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute, and they use I think a state variation of what the Forest Service had used for a long time in forest monitoring. And they collaborate a lot with Forest Service as well as the university foresters at Highlands. And we've learned that that was a great start, but I think we have a lot of room for growth, not only in our protocols, but also in collaboration. And the history of the CFRP program was meant to have everybody part of a community walking through the forest before and walking through the forest after, and visually seeing and discussing the changes. Our students are actually going out as task-oriented crews. We try to get our plots done and share it in a timely manner. But when we meet, for example, cattle permittees on Forest Service land who are interested in what the forage is like, or local hunters who are interested how the thinning could affect populations or recreationists like mountain bikers, I think there's a lot of room for collaboration that I would like to see us grow into by inviting those community groups out with the students and, share those graphs, those pictures, and the simple stories, but to get that collaborative discussion at a higher level.
Great, thanks. It sounds like, yeah, as that conversation and walking the land together happens and others are, intrigued by what's going on there, that there's additional questions that come up and things that people want to know. And so I'm going to switch over. Chaz and Kent, are you seeing that too? And what's the evolution of VGS been, or are there opportunities to add additional data sets to it?
Go ahead, Chaz, and then I'll follow you.
As far as adding more data to it, absolutely. The VGS is very customizable to handle multiple methods, and kind of back to what Kris said, the method that you use should answer the questions that you have. So whether you're using a key area concept or randomized plots like AIM, your method should be targeted to the questions that you want to answer. And yeah, I guess, Kent, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do. And then Bree, I'll go back to your original question on the High Country News. And I didn't read that article, but we shouldn't be surprised that there's areas in poor condition. There are. And some of that's due to management from decades ago, late 1800s even. Some of that still carries forward to today, through the 30s and into the 60s. It sometimes takes time for change to happen. My first supervisor kept telling me, Kent, sometimes the mountain does good because of what we do, and sometimes it does good in spite of what we do. But one thing's for sure, that mountain's going to be there long after you and I are dead. That's true. And sometimes it just takes decades for things to change. Sometimes things are not in good shape because of what we did, maybe recently even. So as Chaz is saying, whatever we do management-wise, we should ask the question, really the question is, if we aren't doing it right, where is it going to show up? And let's monitor for that. And that's, a lot of times we focus on, well, we think we're doing right, and so let's monitor to show we're doing right. But if you really want to keep tabs on yourself, well, if we're not doing it right, where's that going to show up? And let's monitor for that so we can catch it and address that situation. And we do that on a regular basis. So I'll give you just kind of a couple quick examples. Of one project we're working on now, we did some recent monitoring that showed that our soil compaction was quite high. Really, what are we doing? As we got looking closer, we realized that for the past several years, the duration of use has been longer than we probably should have had, and the season of use, particularly during the growing season, was more often than we probably should have done. Oh, okay. Well, how can we correct that? And so what's being proposed is to continue the grazing, but for a shorter season, and to focus more on dormant season use for a while until that compaction lightens up. Okay, good. Right next door to there is an area that, for whatever reason, years ago, decided grazing was not compatible with that area. And you look at it now, there's a lot of thatch buildup. There's a lot of dead plants. The plants aren't healthy. The vigor is low. Why? Well, I think it's because we haven't had grazing there. That thatch buildup is kind of overcome the site. Okay, well, what can we do for that then? You know, this is showing up on our monitoring. Well, I think it needs to be grazed again. And it's in a riparian area, and so we're proposing to graze it between like November through February. That winter season use will be a short duration. But to go in there and kind of clean that up and remove that thatch and improve the vigor of those plants. And so, okay, well, if we do that, if we're wrong in our assumption, where's it going to show up? So let's monitor for that. So we will. And so that's where this kind of comes into play to help us with our monitoring. Again, don't be afraid of it, but as we go along, let's figure it out. And then just maybe one last thing is sometimes the condition will improve or decline, and sometimes we get worked up if it's a little bit downward. But also keep in mind, there's just a natural range of variability. Plants are not static. They come in and they go out. And we're doing a NEPA project now, and a lot of the data was gathered in 2020, which down here was super dry. You talk about the dendrochronology and working with the tree ring lab at the U of A, and they've got data that goes back 1,500 years. It appears that 2020 was one of the driest, if not the driest year in over 1,000 years. And then they're like, you're going to do monitoring on the driest year? Yeah, we want to know what the effects are. And we expect we're probably going to have a downward trend in our perennial species. And sure enough, we did. But that's good to know, and it's good to record it. It's good to see where we are. And then how did we adapt our management to accommodate for that? And now, is it going to continue down? Is it going to go up? You know, what's it going to do? But sometimes that up and down, again, and sometimes it happens because of what we do, and sometimes it happens in spite of what we do. You have to factor in, I think weather sometimes will play even a bigger role than anything we can do management-wise, but we need to be on top of that and continue that monitoring religiously and regularly, and so that whatever that data shows, we can kind of help make sense of things. That's probably a longer answer than you wanted, but that's the world according to Ken.
No, not at all. I really appreciate that. I appreciate that long-term vision and big picture view, because sometimes, you know, we get lost in the details of this, but really understanding how those details can be extrapolated or tell that bigger story, and that we don't narrow in on a single point in time or a single metric, but we look at it within the context of the system. I think that's really important to remember. And so just more on this, and I want to open it up. We're at our time now, and appreciate all of you and your participation. But also want to open it up because I know there's several of you on today that have experience with collaborative monitoring within your communities, whether you're coming from a landowner or agency perspective or NGO perspective. And so, Catherine, if we could go ahead and let people come off of mute if they want to, and share their stories too, or ask some additional questions of each other. And going back to this, Lawrence put a question in here about, you know, the dynamics. Do we see a change in some of these places in these communities where work is being done and collaborative monitoring is happening where relationships can change from confrontational to solutions oriented. And I think there's been examples of that and making collaborative monitoring work for local communities. But also want to go back to, I put something in the chat earlier when Kris was talking about Taylor Payne and this concept of trust. And we talk about trust a lot and building trust, but breaking down what trust actually entails. Came across this a little while ago that trust requires regular assessments of our partners' competence, reliability, and understanding their motives. And that we don't all have to have the same motives, but we have to be clear in our motives and open about them. And so want to just throw that into the conversation if anybody has any thoughts on that. But yeah, I'll open it up. Bill, I see you came off of mute. Do you want to share something?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Bill Melton. I'm a rancher up here and have kind of been following this and participated in the last one, but I have more questions than there is time, so I'll probably have to follow up with people. But I'll start with Kris, because, well, one, thank you for the day here. All presentations were great, and it's just great to see the progress, even though I think it's still a lot smaller than we'd like out there in the West. But Kris, a lot of us have sort of heard about this project that you're working on, and it's incredibly exciting that you can get permittees to come together and manage livestock in a different way with so many people. So however this goes, great effort. But I guess some of the specific questions I've had is, so you talked about the landowners hiring a consultant to do their monitoring, and it wasn't exactly clear how that information was being shared with the monitoring that was done on public land. And so my question is it really completely proprietary with, you know, are the private guys really holding that? And if they were, how did they use their data to influence decisions over the whole allotment? Or is it being shared, or is it being shared selectively? How are people approaching, the different groups approaching sharing their respective data so that decision-making of the group could be more informed?
Yeah, good questions. Yeah, so the ranchers who form that LLC, they've hired a consultant to do their own monitoring. And part of that is in response to past litigation. They want to make sure that if this whole project is litigated, they have data that they can take in and show in the courts. So they're just making sure that data is there. And they formed before my group, let's say, joined the project. We've come on, we duplicate some of that effort, but we focus a lot in riparian areas. And so again, we're kind of there getting different pools of data. The GIP, Taylor's group, also does some forage monitoring and overlaps a little, but they can't do it as extensively as per se the ranchers want to have it in case of a lawsuit. So that data, you know, at this point, I could probably ask those guys and they would share it with me. I just haven't asked, I haven't needed those data for the research questions that we are approaching in our group and that the data streams that we're collecting. This has been a really long effort, like I was saying. And so there's been a lot of trust built amongst the groups. Taylor has been, you know, such a key player building trust with the 38 different operations that are working. I've been working on this project for 7 years, and it wasn't until 2 years ago that the LLC started inviting me to their meetings, right? So it's a slow gain of trust. And now I go to those meetings and I report out what we're finding. The BLM has a lot of contact with them. So there are a lot of personal relationships going on amongst the different groups involved. And those are continuing to develop over time. I think the end result is that we are sharing the data as needed to make decisions that need to be made. So for example, stubble height data or biomass production data can be used to determine if the rotation system that's going to be implemented is working, if we need to rotate quicker, slower, in a different manner. So I feel like at this point, those data are all going to be shared when needed. Is that getting at your question?
Oh yeah, no, I mean,
Okay, cool.
Bree, can I just follow up with a quick follow-up. So obviously the cloud of litigation was the big motivator for the permittees. The threat of litigation was a kind of a motivator. So in the process of developing this, those parties who everybody probably knew would be potential litigators, or maybe not, how have those potential parties that were maybe potential litigators against this whole thing, how have they engaged with this process, if at all?
Yeah, there have been a number of engagements. They've continued to litigate a permit or a allotment that's directly adjacent to this whole area. So that allotment was in litigation for 10 years. It came out of litigation, I think, for a month, and then it went right back into litigation. So there's a lot of confrontation with some of those groups still. It's hard to, we want to be as collaborative as possible, but it's hard to bring everybody into the fold when one group's mission is to stop the collaboration from happening. So that can be a hard thing. That litigation, yeah, so there is confrontation that can happen. And I personally think that when you do collaborations, you have to protect the collaboration moving forward with the shared vision that collaboration has, not cutting off dissenting voices, listening to them, but inviting them to the table when it's productive for everybody to move forward with possibly compromises. So I hope I didn't say too confrontational there. Yeah.
No, appreciate this. So I'll stop because I'm sure others have questions, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. And I just want to acknowledge, is it Nika? Your comment in the chat there about the High Country News article, and BLM has taken actions in the majority of cases to address the issues that are within management control. I think that's great to note. And also just back to Kent's comment that, you know, acknowledging, I think that as land managers that we have made mistakes, but again, that these types of efforts, these types of community-based projects are really, I think, turning the tide, and both in just our understanding of these systems, the way that we're approaching monitoring, the way that we're approaching stewardship. It's just great to hear all the different examples that are out there of good work being done. And I love the idea of the, you know, as these collaborations happen, new questions emerge that we're, you know, curious about, and we continue to build our understanding. And I recently heard somebody say, you know, if you want to influence a change in management, that you need to change the metric. And if we just keep asking the same questions or monitoring the same thing over and over, we're probably going to keep getting the same results in our management. But if we can really think beyond that, which I think you all are doing, is really meaningful. Any other questions? Again, feel free if you want to take yourself off of mute and jump in, or you can still post in chat if you'd like to.
I'll be brave, or I don't know, annoying, one or the other, but this is really fun. And it's fun to see folks on here that have been in this space for a long time. I was really excited, Kris, also to hear again about the economic and social monitoring aspects, which I feel like I think it's a great step that we're doing more like collaborative ecological monitoring. And I don't feel like that's totally, like, we're not totally there yet, kind of like Bill is saying, but I think the next step also we're realizing is really, how does this help our producers be able to keep doing good adaptive management into the future and making sure it works for us, for our communities and their sustainability economically. So I just don't know how to do that. And I would be really curious at what you're learning, Kris, or what you're going to try to learn, and just maybe how we can like keep updated with what you're learning, so we can maybe do that more in other places in the West.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm a trained ecologist, but my PhD was also had some social science pieces. I am not an economist. But it's been, you know, one thing I realized early is that you can come up with all the ecological solutions you want, but if those solutions don't work for the people that are supposed to implement them, they will never be implemented. So you really need to address these other really important aspects of putting these projects in place. So we are working super closely with, again, Taylor Payne, who lives in this community, and have come up with a survey that focuses on understanding the risks that the different permittees are taking when they're joining this pretty unusual project where they've given up their individual grazing permits, and now that LLC gets a single grazing permit, and management decisions are broad and out of their hands, not completely, but it's at a board level. Understanding how they're feeling about those risks, why they're joining, what do they expect the rewards to be, and making sure that we can be working towards what the good outcomes people want, right? So if people want to be ready for any litigation, if it comes down to the line, to make sure that we have the data that we're sharing to prepare for that outcome. It's also been really fun in those surveys to learn other things people are hoping to come out of this project. People feel really strongly that they're stewards of this landscape, and they feel strongly that this project is going to allow them to graze the land differently, and that they're going to see things like the riparian areas become much healthier, and they're really excited about that. So yeah, those surveys are a first step, and they're kind of the key to bigger conversations. As I'm getting to know the community, it's opening the doors to sit down with interviews, and those surveys will be the basis of ideas, but then you can really hear people's stories and thoughts on how this project is going. Though the surveys are going to be published, it'll be shared with our partners in all different ways. The interviews will be folded into that. And then the economic analysis is also in collaboration with GIP and Taylor's group, so the Grazing Improvement Program. When they formed the LLC, they combined their finances. And so now they have a record of the finances across that previously 10 allotment system before the switch, which is going to happen this year, and then following the switch. So we're going to be able to see how finances change once the switch is implemented. We're also going to consider the large amount of monies that have come in through various grants to really understand what it took to make this happen in so many ways, knowing that number is going to be large, but hopefully we can streamline a bunch of the barriers that it took to start this project and make future projects cheaper. So that also will be available in a publication, but definitely a white paper form.
Can I'm gonna follow up, well, slightly different direction, I guess, but related, because I think this ties into the economics of it. I mean, certainly the social side of it, and then the economics of not just for those permittees, but the larger community, and also, just our appreciation, I guess, for these communities. And so for Kris and David, and Bill, I want to pose this to you too, because I know you think a lot about this, but Kris and David, what has the change for you been, or what has this offered to you, being, increasingly invited into these communities, and to serve these communities in the ways that you each are, and David, to expand on it with, even if you guys aren't collecting economic data, anecdotally, what do you feel like the project is doing for the community? And then Bill, I know as a long-term community member, you're looking at bringing people into your community in a sustainable fashion. And so you can kind of talk about it from the flip side, I guess. But yeah, do you guys I'd love to hear what you think about that.
David, why don't you go?
Okay, I'll jump in. Bree, I want to answer that question and tie it into a question that Lawrence asked about changing dynamics with conflict. And to start, I worked for Rocky Mountain Youth Corps as a program coordinator and a supervisor about 12 years ago. And in a community just over the mountain from where we're monitoring now, separate than the one I grew up in where I know everybody, I was accosted by somebody who thought I worked for the U.S. Forest Service because I had a uniform on with a patch. I don't think they read it in detail, but they challenged me very angrily about the loss of rights to their traditional land grant lands for getting fuel wood, running their livestock and hunting based on their traditional management systems. It was a major heads up for me because I grew up in a household seeing federal land as being super positive, as a place where I could go hunting and fishing. And so I started to understand the history of our area better. Through our youth monitoring, many of the children of these communities have been part of our monitoring teams. The grandchildren of some of these people, maybe even the person that accosted me 12 years ago. And as they get out, they're learning the historical context along with their teacher, along with those involved in monitoring. And we have taken it upon ourselves to go above and beyond the protocols expected of us, but we're just starting it. So that's why I didn't have anything to report on this spring, where we're going to interview the woodcutters, the leñeros, as they call themselves, who are part of the thinning projects to restore the federal lands that were historically their communal lands, to look at what they feel about now having access again. So it's going to be driven by the students involved. I don't, we're not going to say we're economists or sociologists, but we want to see what is their feel about the benefit of getting back and being able to get fuel wood out of this land through at least taking small diameter timber, and also the economic benefits. And I'll give you just a quick metric that we know of, and we want to know what they're doing with this. But if their community members given 1 acre to thin, they're getting about 5 cords of fuel wood out of that. And we're not working with too many permittees in this area when it comes to cattle. There's only one in this whole region. He is curious about changes, but if our monitoring continues throughout the Carson National Forest, I think what I'm learning from many people here today and the other presenters is we can do a lot more looking at forage and benefits to both permittee livestock as well as wildlife.
Want me to go next? So the question is the benefits of the collaboration. Is that kind of what you're getting at, Bree?
Yeah, and I think, how you look, given that you've been exploring and developing a cooperative monitoring project, but you've also been participating in other aspects of resource management related to the community and being a NAP mentor. And so what does it look like, bringing people into a community that you're a part of and trying to expand opportunities in a community that you're a part of, that you've been a part of? And how do you see this all fitting into that?
Yeah, I'll see it. We can go for a few hours on that one. But there's so many layers to this. I mean, you mentioned, I'll just go with what, your agrarian program. So, we're in our 3rd year, and we had a wonderful apprentice who's now actually got a job in another community, a really good job, another ranching related job in another community in Montana. And that particular apprentice, having that opportunity to come in, the way you guys have set that up, really added a lot of value to our business in terms of how we manage and how we actually do the monitoring. And like, Natalie, who did a lot of videos on the ranch and show every month, and they were just hilarious, but also very informative of how ranches work. And so a lot of people got a lot of pleasure out of just her skills of sharing what we were doing out here. And we have a new one here who's just on a roll to be great, and just again can add a lot of value to our business. And we're already seeing neighbors who, oh yeah, can Carlisle come over and do something here? And so we try to share the apprentices over the community mentorship opportunities. But You know, the other thing with, you know, and Patrick Lindrum is on the call from World Wildlife Fund, and with the Rangeland Monitoring Group, our ranch in particular and the region generally, we've now established pretty tangible relationships with groups like Audubon and World Wildlife Fund and the Nature Conservancy. And these are bringing a lot of benefits for the ranch to get resources, infrastructure, technical, otherwise, that wouldn't have risen if these relationships over time hadn't been built. And the idea in monitoring is like core to creating trust between all these groups, because their constituent needs to know, well, if we're going to invest in Milton Family's ranch, what are we getting out of it? And so developing not only a monitoring program for our own ranch, but for the region creates a lot of good cover. I don't know if cover is the right word for these national groups who want to support sustainable and ecologically responsive ranching, to have a shared monitoring program that can tell a story at multiple levels, and just the leverage of having such a large number of people doing a similar kind of thing. It just creates credibility, like, well, yeah, well, if all these people are playing and they all seem to be confident that they're getting the information they need to make good choices, then there's just a lot of capacity in changing how people view our ranching culture. So I mean, this is, yeah, as many people know, I mean, this is what drives me every time I get up in the morning. But the opportunities for collaboration, both in the West and obviously in the world, are immense. And it's the only way that we're going to get through some of this crap we're dealing with. But anyway, thanks for asking, and love to visit more. But I'm just so excited to see other people doing great stuff, because we just need all this times 1,000 to finally make the changes we need to make. Thanks,
Bill.
And then Pat, if after Kris, Patrick wants to say, yeah, how does this feel from World Wildlife Fund? maybe he might be willing to share.
That would be great. I know there's more people on here. Jack Hansen, I'm looking at you too. I know that you do a lot of collaborative work. And so, yeah, I know there's other people that have things to say.
I definitely can speak. I'm also seeing in the chat that there's some more questions coming in. So I'll be brief, or we can cut to the questions. You pick, Bree.
Go ahead, and then we'll jump over to, it looks like Ty maybe has some questions. So, but yeah, if you want to answer.
Yeah, and so I'm going to pull from your initial question, what has being involved in this whole Three Creeks project meant to me personally? And it has been amazing to become slowly a part of that community. As a scientist, you're trained to be able to answer scientific questions, but answering questions that mean something to a group of people, and not just in a little way, but their people's livelihoods rely on us figuring some of this stuff out. And gaining the trust of that community when the answers that I might tell them might not always be the answers they want to hear. I think that's really powerful, that kind of communication that can develop. It gives me a lot of hope that we can spread that kind of communication across our country, because I think we need these dialogues amongst groups of people that are different. I mean, just a little on my background, I moved to Utah from Santa Cruz, California. So I am very different from a lot of the very traditional ranchers that I work with. But out here, there's something called cowboy logic, which is if you have something to add to this discussion, you're welcome to the table to help us try to solve this problem. And I've just loved that idea and feel really lucky to be able to be at that table.
Thanks, Kris. That's funny. The cowboy logic I know about is about sitting in the middle in the pickup, but I'm glad that there's another form of cowboy logic out there. So Ty put his question in the chat, and he says, how would the group define community, and what was the process to start the project? What was the process, to start the project? What did it look like?
I'm gonna let David talk again.
how did it start? In our case, was beers on the back porch of a neighbor's house, to be honest. And just putting together things that we felt strongly about in the community. And as a teacher, for me, I was notorious for booking a lot of field trips to try to get my students outside and connected to their neighbors. And sometimes at the loss of classroom and academic time. And so finding these extracurricular activities, and for me, it was important that it was a paid opportunity for students to rival their challenges of sometimes a few of my students had to pay bills for their family. And they would tell me my alternative is a grocery store or a restaurant. And I'd much rather hire motivated go-getters to get out and understand their natural resources than to lose them to just paying bills with a grocery store job. So that
Thanks, David.
covered.
Yeah, I think similar experiences for me that, yeah, most good projects are born over food or beers.
Yeah, I'd say in Utah, not over beers as much, but over food potentially. The process for the Three Creeks project started before I was a part of it. And so that was about 12 years ago. And it was the result of a lawsuit potentially affecting grazing on these public lands. And then there was a very long community process of the stakeholders and the permittees coming together and trying to find a solution to that, and calling on a lot of different voices and resources to try to figure out what could be done. That's a long story, so that's what I'm going to say for now. But for community, like I define, when I use the word community for the Three Creeks area, I do mean the permittees that live up in that community. But the community of the Three Creeks project is bigger than that. It involves the agencies that are involved and the managers from those agencies. It includes the university researchers and students that go up and interact. It includes the public, because these are public lands. So the community of Three Creeks is big, but when I use the word community, I definitely mean the relationships I'm building in that particular place.
Thanks, Chris.
Can I ask a question? Hold on a second. We'll just call him later. When you started to try to do joint cooperative monitoring, was it something that was there something like the lawsuit or anything like that kind of started off up at Three Creeks, or when you started working collaboratively with the university?
No, that started with a guy named Chuck Duncan, who had he retired after 40 years. And he just had a passion for range management. In fact, I just saw him in the store a couple of days ago. He's a cool dude. Funny story, one time he's working on a grazing plan, and he couldn't sleep at night because this was going through his mind, and he'd often go into work at 4 or 5 in the morning anyway. So when he goes in early to work on this, and he calls the rancher up, "Hey, I've got a question on this." And the guy's like, "Hello?" He's like, "Yeah, hey, I got a question on this." He's like, "Do you know what time it is?" "Hey, if I'm up, you're up." So anyways, they got through, and they got done. The guy said, "Well, thanks, Chuck, but don't ever call me at 3 a.m. ever again." So that's just how he was. So he had a good relationship with the University of Arizona and the Extension office. And that's just how he was. He was very much about working together. And so he developed the first cooperative monitoring agreement. And they actually read those surveys every year. Like every year, you're not going to see a change in one year to the next for long term. So then we started sharing that with the other districts on the forest and rereading them every 3 to 5 years. And then, that was quite successful. And so then the Tonto, they started what's called Reading the Range program. And that extension agent was amazing. And again, he wouldn't read them unless both the permittee and the Forest Service was there together. Because he realized the true value sometimes of this monitoring isn't the data, it's being out there together, looking at it, whatever it is, together, and then discussing it together. And sometimes that's more important than the data itself. And so that was on the Tonto. And then we've expanded it just these last couple of years to the other 4 forests in Arizona. It has, though, been very beneficial as lawsuits have come up, and we just received a couple notice of intents to sue. And we're, of course, very happy that we have a lot of monitoring data, hundreds of transects to show where things are good and show where things are bad and where we need to improve. It shows everything, but at least we're making informed decisions, and we're applying sound management practices based on our monitoring. And so we can apply adaptive management, which is completely based on monitoring. So yeah, it's a huge help for us. And with monitoring, you either live with it or you go to court and lose without it. So the more we have, we're glad to have it. But to answer your question, though, it didn't start because of litigation, but it's been a huge help as we've gone to litigation.
Thanks, Kent. Thanks for sharing the story. I love hearing about people like that. There's just, a lot of people that do great work out there and have in the past and continue to. Brooke asked, was that Dr. Jim Sprinkle who helped with the Reading the Range program?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, Jim's amazing.
Thanks. And then just want to acknowledge, David put in the chat that community for them on the forest thinning projects are all the folks who live adjacent to these lands, who use the lands, and who are tasked with managing resources in and around them. So thanks, David, for adding that in. We've been on for quite some time, and I can talk about this stuff forever. But just want to acknowledge and say thank you, all of you, for the time that you spent. I do, if I could ask a question of Patrick. I believe that's Bill. Is that correct? Patrick is with WWF. And then Matt. Also, if you guys would both share from your perspectives, what does it look like for you guys when you're invited onto these ranching operations and onto these lands by community members to do the work that you both do? And I would say Matt is with Audubon in California. And so, if you both could share. Thanks. We'll start with you, Patrick.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. For us, really, that's sort of the, I guess, ultimate success, right? Is that when groups like Bill's or some of those others in our area are open to our support, and we can lend a helping hand in whatever way possible. That's really what we're striving for. And so we're not landowners, we're not land managers, we're really supporters. And one of the ways we do that is through these monitoring projects. So I think thinking about the community discussion that just happened, I think that also extends, like, everybody on this call, right? We're all part of the community, trying to work towards a better state. And so I think these collaborative efforts just lead towards that. I'll leave it there.
Matt, are you there? Would you be willing to share with us? Okay, maybe he's not there. Again, just thanks everyone. Super fun conversation, and thanks to the speakers. Really enjoyed hearing the stories and all of the great work that's being done out there. So if there's no other questions with that, I think we can sign off.